I'm going to start now. Svetlana, can you put yours on?
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Hi, Lulu.
Hello.
Lana, you put.
Can I just say quickly, John, sorry, there's a couple talking from West Sussex, I think Lulu might say a word, and
Yeah.
Mandy Churcher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
And I can't think of the lady's name. Sue, I think, from Aldenbourne.
Yeah.
So there could be about 3.
I won't take long.
No worries. Just to let you know. So there's a couple feeding back from West Sussex.
The hot spot.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you know if you can make me a co-host just in case?
Yeah, that's a good idea, Svetlana.
John, can I just say my iPhone's got a tendency to overheat. So if I disappear, that's why.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Abrams, and I'm the Inclusion London's Campaign and Justice Coordinator. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's event, which has been put together by several passionate organisations, groups and individuals from across the country. And we're united in our belief that social care charging is very unfair and needs to be scrapped. And we're also really passionate about transforming social care. So some of the group members include Adult Social Care Warriors, WinVisible, In Control, DPAC, Inclusion London, JRIMG Norfolk, Greenwich DPAC, Social Care Futures, Bringing Us Together, and Oppose Social Care Charging in Cheshire. And apologies if I've missed anyone off the list. So to begin with, a bit of housekeeping. We are joined by 2 BSL interpreters and a palantypist who will provide captioning. You can access the captioning on the bottom of the Zoom screen. And we also have stream text available for those who want to be able to manipulate the size and fonts of the text. And I'll put that in the chat box. So we have a fantastic lineup of speakers today from Norfolk, from Camden Town, the groundbreakers in Hammersmith and Fulham, which is the only council in England which doesn't apply social care charging. We also have campaigners from Manchester and Cornwall. And this session is really important because local authorities across England are set up in very different ways. So there isn't one size that fits all model of challenging social care charging. It does depend on specific local circumstances. For example, in Manchester, and we'll be hearing from a group in Cheshire, a mayor's elected, and probably a lot of you have heard of him, Andy Burnham, and he's in a lot of media attention. So applying pressure and tactics in an area such as Manchester may be very different from somewhere in London where you have a local authority with a large majority who are not necessarily going to listen to small groups of disabled campaigners and their allies. So one of the main aims of this workshop is to hear from different groups and the campaigning and tactics that they're using. So for example, in Norfolk, they've successfully used legal challenges. In Hammersmith and Fulham, it was a mixture of legal challenges and building up relationships with council officers and council leaders and working closely with them over several years to bring about transformation and change. And in other areas of the country, it may be that people need to engage in more in-your-face tactics, direct action to bring about change. So we're hoping to put together different models of what's going on. So I'd now like to introduce my colleague, Svetlana. She's Inclusion London's Director of Campaigns and Justice. She is a disabled lawyer who's spent many years fighting for the rights of disabled people. And she has also run some very informative and excellent workshops on knowing your rights around social care charging. And we'll put some of the links in the chat box and also send them out later. So over to you, Svetlana.
Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. And thanks to everyone who was involved in organizing today's event. So I'll just say very quickly a few words about what Inclusion London is doing about social care charging. But firstly, I want to start with this. And I know all of us on the panel know this, but it's striking to know that not everyone else in general public knows that social care is not free. People have to pay for it. And although a lot of public debate is about people having to sell their home, there's very little about people having to pay out of their means-tested benefits, the little money that they already have for very basic, often very basic support that they need to just live a normal life. And usually that support is nowhere near enough what people need anyway. So this is why we are campaigning against this. We believe social care should be free. And we have currently the legal framework that we have. So there are two ways we believe to change this situation. One way is to make national government change the law, or at least set higher standards so people are left with much more money, so that the means-tested system is much better and people don't have to pay very little money they've got. And also make government, obviously we want government to scrap social care charging altogether. So that is our victory. Leaving people with a bit more money is a step towards it, we believe. So this is what we do at Inclusion London. We try and focus on national level. We have a petition going, we're writing to MPs, we're briefing for debates. We are trying to engage with civil servants who are currently developing the reform for social care, which has been promised for years. But we are trying to raise awareness about this specific issue and bring other organizations that are campaigning in this field together to agree that we all should campaign for either free social care or significant improvements in how people are asked to pay for it and how much money they're asked to contribute. So that's one bit of work that we're doing, and we'll post our petition in the chat. We are also trying to raise media attention and working with organizations like Social Care Futures and In Control and some groups here. So there, you might have seen some articles in the national media. There, for example, will be a program on BBC Radio 4 next week. And again, we'll post a link to a chat. So we believe, to raise profile of this issue so that more people know and more people are outraged. And another thing that we do is we want to make sure people know their rights. So that's why we did those webinars to help those families and disabled individuals who are at the moment trying to dispute their charging assessments. And we're also supporting local groups. So our main focus is obviously in London, because we are supporting deaf and disabled people's organizations in London. We're supporting them to work with local authorities in, as John said, different ways, depending on how best to influence this a particular local authority. But we support groups to campaign against charging, or again to campaign for much to relieve the immediate pressure on people, and, for example, make sure local authority leave people with more money to live on. So this is our work broadly, and we will continue putting pressure on national government with regards to scrapping social charging altogether.
Thank you, Svetlana. I forgot to mention that if you do have questions, to use the question and answer function, the Q&A, because we'll be monitoring the questions for the speakers, and it's much easier if you put them in there in the chat box. If you put them in the chat box, we can't guarantee that we'll see them. So thank you again, Svetlana. And I'd now like to introduce our first speaker. Zara Todd. And this is really exciting. I should have said that not just up and down England are we having people's experience. Zara has experience of the national insurance scheme that was introduced in Australia and New Zealand. And she was fortunately over there at the time talking to campaigners and their experiences, which she will now share with us. So over to you, Zara.
Afternoon, everyone. So the National Disability Insurance Scheme is a scheme that is currently operating in Australia. Why it's relevant to the campaigning that you are doing or hoping to do is originally and traditionally, Australia has had a history of institutions, and its social care support was generally giving block funding to service providers, and therefore quite institutionalized. In 2008, the Australian government arranged a review of independent living in Australia, and were looking for ideas about how to improve the situation by 2020 for disabled people, because Australia has quite bad kind of scoring rates internationally around disability rights. Through this process, a suggestion was made to improve independent living in Australia by actually adopting a scheme or service similar to the Independent Living Fund, which many of you will be familiar with, that we used to have in the UK. Over a number of years, and this is the really important thing, disabled people and their allies campaigned towards policymakers and politicians. They made sure that disabled people and carers and family members were at public debates, were at events with politicians, that every time social care was discussed, there was a disabled person in the room talking about why it was important that the situation was improved and that more choice and control was created. This was done through a campaign called Every Australian Counts. And basically this campaign over a number of years managed to get cross-party support in Australia for a public referendum to increase the funding towards independent living for disabled people. And so a referendum took place, and through the campaigning of disabled people, the Australian population voted in favour of increasing their equivalent of national insurance by 0.5% to cover the establishment of a disability, a national disability insurance scheme. So that was really, really good, and it showed the value of campaigning. I'm now going to share some of the consequences and challenges that have come from that. And in preparation for today, I actually spoke to campaigners that I met with in Australia and to see what had changed since I last visited. So when I was in Australia in 2017, they were just beginning the rollout of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And it was quite difficult because in Australia, they do not have a provider of last resort. So in Australia, you either get funding from a service or from your budget, but if that budget runs out, there is no local authority to go, we will continue providing care or we will top up that care. And it was proving to be quite difficult because the model that the Australian government chose was a marketisation model, and Australia is bigger than Europe in terms of geography, and what they found very quickly in the rollout were that there were parts of Australia where it was just not economically viable for a company to offer personal assistance services because someone might be 2 or 3 hours away from a city or even a town. And so there were already problems emerging in the rollout. One of the things that's become very apparent is that the budget that they set of 0.5% wasn't big enough for the population of disabled people in Australia. So they've had to increase the budget a number of times, but actually now the Australian government is challenging the amount of spend on social care. So disability activists in Australia are now having to campaign again to justify the spend that there is. And unfortunately, at the moment, the National Disability Insurance Scheme is only covering the needs of about 1 in 10 disabled people in Australia. One of the challenges has been, because they haven't got a local authority structure, core services that have lower thresholds in order to get support are struggling to have the funding to continue to exist. So a lot of core services and advocacy services have closed because there isn't people putting their personal budgets into those services in a high enough number to keep them open. So there are quite a lot of challenges, but the initial success of the programme was to reframe social care as an issue that affected all Australians and to make the support of disabled people to live independent lives something that was pertinent to everyone and not just disabled people. So the narrative in the media was, and still is, but slightly less so, much more kind of pro disability rights than we currently find in the UK. I think I'm going to stop there, but if anyone has any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, and if I can't answer them, I can probably find out the answer from an activist in Australia.
myself. Thank you very much, Zara, for a fascinating insight into what's going on in Australia. So what do you think are some of the key lessons that campaigners can learn in England?
The first thing is mobilisation and FaceTime with politicians and decision makers is really, really important. What got the referendum in favour of setting up the insurance service was disabled people being visible and our allies being visible, and basically keeping the topic on, well, the focus on the topic. So the attention that the disability community managed to raise around independent living was absolutely critical for the service to be created in itself. So making sure it came up in debates that were much broader than just disability related discussions. So making sure that when there was like a leadership debate, that someone would ask questions there. The equivalent of things like question time, people were present in the audience asking questions about what does social care look like in Australia and how do we value disabled people. So that being present and being seen and keeping it as an issue on the table and on the agenda and in the media was really important. Also, working with the public to explain why it was an issue of concern to the general public and not just disabled people was a very key element of their success. By framing the campaign as every Australian counts, they made it about everyone in society and about what someone might need were they to become disabled or have a disabled family member. So they were the key elements of success. The challenges are around how do you realise a commitment that you make essentially based on ideas into something that functionally works. The biggest challenge for Australia is that they underestimated the demand and the budgetary requirements of a disability insurance service. So they got everyone on board for the 0.5%, and then when they've had to go back and say actually that's not enough to cover it, that is where the conflict and tension has arisen, because people are like, but you said it would only take 0.5%. Now you're saying it will take 1.5%. So I think being clear about the maths and clear about what you need is very, very important. The other thing that has made it difficult for Australia is the sheer size of the country and the fact that there aren't local authorities in the same way. So there is no one to pick up when things go wrong, or if someone runs out of money. One of the current debates that's going on with the Australian government is that the people that are eligible and have got the NDIS payments are actually in their assessments coming out with needing more money than people anticipated. So now the Australian government is trying to make the assessment process independent in their opinion, which could lead to a more harsh assessment situation, because at the moment they think that people are getting too much when they're assessed.
Thank you very much, Zara, and thank you for joining us. I know you have to leave shortly. I think one of the key messages for us is around mobilisation. We've had over 100 people sign up for this webinar. We've had almost 200 people signing up to other webinars on challenging social care charging knowing your rights. So it really is an important political moment that social care is on the agenda. The Prime Minister talks about it. And so I really do think that there is a window of opportunity where disabled people, carers, parents, and allies can have an impact on the debate. And so it's really exciting that we're all coming together at this point in time to bring about change. So I'd like now to go to our next speaker from Cornwall. If you could turn on your camera, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. The situation in Cornwall, I run a Just, Advocates for Disability Justice, and charging for care came to our attention quite early on in amongst the other things that we're doing. In particular, I'd like just to outline two cases that we've advocated for. One case where we challenged the local authority on the charges, reduced the charging from £35 a week down to £5, and highlighted that they were very unaware of the Norfolk judgment. Although they maintain, the local authority maintains that it is compliant, we don't yet have enough evidence to say that they're not. Although their policy may well be Norfolk compliant, certainly what their assessors are doing in terms of charging individuals doesn't appear to be Norfolk compliant. And the other case is quite interesting because although it's about social care, it became quite obvious to us that actually the individual concerned should be entitled to continuing healthcare funding, which, as many of you may or may not know, is fully funded. So all your healthcare and social care needs are met and paid for by the NHS. And in our opinion, we've helped the individual concerned present a very strong case, and it's now going to appeal, and we're quite confident that we will win that appeal. And that's about it, really. We've lobbied the local authority. We've joined with bringing us together to try and make a bigger impact, perhaps nationally, on the charges for care. But we have very limited resources, and that's all we're able to do. That's it, John. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So is there any kind of campaigning action going on down in Cornwall?
No, it just seems to be the only body that's actually challenging it locally.
So do you think there's an appetite for campaigning?
With most things, it comes down to certain individuals and a lot of people complain about it, but when you ask them to kind of join with you to kind of challenge the local authority or to do something larger, people just don't want to come forward, don't want to expose themselves to that.
So yeah, that's another reason why we're bringing together all these groups so campaigners in different parts of the country or people who are thinking about campaigning can kind of understand that they're not battling on their own, and that groups can kind of come together and share experiences and tactics. So thanks very much, Steve, for that.
Can I just ask a question, please?
Sure.
Steve, you said that the assessors you didn't think were acting properly, even if you thought the policy might be correct. Can you just explain a little bit more about that?
I didn't say, what I said was the local authority believed that their policy is correct.
Yeah.
I don't believe, even if it is correct, and I don't believe it is, they consulted on the policy pre-Norfolk, but they did not consult on it post-Norfolk. So they don't really have a sound platform on which to say that it is compliant. And from my own experience with the local authority and health, is that the advice that they get, the legal advice they get, is very poor and is quite often wrong on these things. So my advice to everybody is challenge and challenge again, and do not take a local authority or the word of any health related body as being correct. Always do your research, always challenge.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Marilyn, whilst you're here, I may switch the agenda round because Norfolk's been, I hope you don't mind.
No, I think it's Helen next though.
It's just quite a few speakers have mentioned Norfolk.
Okay.
And so have mentioned the Norfolk judgment. And so maybe it would perhaps be helpful if you talked about that now.
Sure. Okay. Right. Yes, I'm on the steering group of a group called JRIMG Norfolk, which stands for the Judicial Review, Implementation and Monitoring Group. We're a task group set up after Justice Griffith's judgment in December 2020 to work within Norfolk to ensure any replacement policies co-produced with disabled people and, where appropriate, their family carers. Our steering group consists of 4 disabled people and 2 family carers. Now, the judgment itself, which is in my information sheet, which hopefully is in chat, a link to it, was brought by Lee Day, working on behalf of a young woman, SH, aged 24 years, who has Down syndrome, and found Norfolk County Council to have breached the human rights and discriminated against severely disabled people in the county. It was about care charges resulting from the changes to the minimum income guarantee, MIG, for working age adults, which the government introduced as a way for LAs to raise more funding for adult social care rather than fund them from central government. Now, the basics of the judgment are that those people who received higher levels of DWP benefits, in particular the enhanced daily living component of PIP, had more income to be counted in the minimum income guarantee assessments, resulting in higher charges for those people. In addition, as most of these people are also in the support group of ESA, Employment Support Allowance, they are, by ESA's own definition, highly unlikely to be in paid employment. On the other hand, a disabled person who is in employment under the guidance does not have his income counted towards his charge calculation. Thus, people in SH's situation had higher charges and no way of supplementing their income with employment earnings. The barristers argued that this affected SH's future chances of independent living, and this was agreed by Justice Griffiths. In Norfolk, the LA decided to introduce the MIG charges in the harshest possible way they could, and ultimately include all benefits governments allowed, with no proper reference to the guidance that the government produced, and in particular, sections 8.46 and 8.47 were key to the judgment. In addition, the question of properly functioning disability-related expense schemes, DREs, to offset the charges was raised as an important factor. Now, since the judgment, Lee Day have produced further advice for local authorities across the country, and I've put a link to this advice in my information sheet in chat for those who would like to see how the judgment might apply to their local authority. A quick summary of that advice includes this from the Matrix barristers who presented the Norfolk case, and they say, in our view, the effect of SH is that councils with similar charging policies to Norfolk may be unlawfully discriminating against individuals like SH. In particular, policies which A, reduce the MIG to the statutory minimum, B, choose not to disregard certain disability benefits, C, have poorly functioning DRE schemes, and D, do not consider alternative approaches, are likely to be discriminating against severely disabled people. There may also be other categories of claimants who are in a worse position than those in SH's cohort, such as severely disabled individuals under 25 who are in receipt of severe disability premium. While other council policies will not be automatically unlawful, local authorities will need to consider the judgment in SH in order to discharge the public sector equality duty and to avoid breaching their duties under the Human Rights Act. Failure to engage with those raising this matter could amount to maladministration. Now, listed in their suggested ways for a good way forward with other LAs include, and I quote, right to local authorities monitoring officers who have a statutory duty to report to the council where it appears to him or her that the authority has done or is about to do anything which would be likely to contravene the law or which would constitute maladministration. Now, JRIMG wrote to all 150 local authorities in March, linking the Norfolk judgment and asking them how their LA would respond. We also learned at that stage that the charity Cascade had also written to them in the same vein. Those local authorities that replied, apart from Hammersmith and Fulham and a minority who said they were considering their position in the light of the Norfolk judgment, most said they were seeking further advice from the Department of Health and Social Care and the National Association of Financial Officers and would write further once they had this advice. JRMG wrote to both the Department of Health and Social Care and the National Association of Financial Officers and asked what this advice would be. The Department of Health and Social Care said that due to the higher value of correspondence during the pandemic, they were unable to reply at this time. And the National Association of Financial Officers have not replied at all. So there was then information that LAs considered they could challenge the judge. There was then information that we heard, I should say, that LAs considered that they could challenge the judgment, but have not said on what legal basis. And as we can see by Leaday's further advice, and I quote, "We do not think that councils could simply rely on the view that the decision in SH is wrong. It was not challenged by way of appeal. It is thus good law. It seems to us highly unlikely that a different administrative court judge could depart from such a recent decision if directly on point, even if not strictly bound by it, and absent some major distinguishing factor." The second thing that Leaday suggests is that a next step may be to use the Freedom of Information Act to elicit further information about the steps taken since the decision in SH and whether an updated equality impact assessment has been undertaken since that decision. This is the stage we've now reached, and JRMG are more than happy to collect the results of any FOI requests that you may make to your local council, and our details include our email address or on the info sheet. Some people have already taken action. In particular, a family member of a disabled person in East Cheshire, represented by Mitchell Owen solicitors, has successfully challenged East Cheshire, and they have refunded the person with charges and committed to reviewing their policy on the understanding that the person stops further legal action. Helen, who is about to speak shortly, has taken the decision, Helen's from Cheshire incidentally, to send FOIs to all the LAs, and JRMG have shared their database from their original letters to all LAs to assist in this. In Norfolk, JRMG are meeting with Norfolk County Council directors who have engaged a person from an organisation called the Public Office, who are developing a reference group and inviting interested groups in the county to hear what we have to say and report back to Norfolk County Council. We have agreed a meeting with NCC and our members, specifically on DREs and the Norfolk system. One of our biggest issues, as we see it, is that the same politicians that ignored us for 2 years until SH took the action and won are still in place, And ultimately, it is they that have to develop listening skills. This could be a problem if, in Norfolk, we are faced with the same intransigent attitude that we faced for 2 years prior to getting the judgment. We will be representing our members and all disabled Norfolk people at these meetings, and we're hoping we can change hearts and minds for the better of all. Thus, this national movement is important to us as the rest of the country, and we do need to be reaching the people that have influence and power to really get behind our visions of transforming social care. Our strength comes simply from working together and pushing forward as one. Our ultimate aim is for a system free of charges, as it would be if we were under NHS care. And this is gaining momentum with some leading politicians. For example, Andy Burnham, Mayor of Manchester, has recently supported this publicly. If you're here today concerned about your charges or the charges of someone you care for, then you can be assured there are others in the same position. Think of forming a support group in your area. Join our sessions regularly to get updates and information. Please do complete the survey so we can put you in touch, if possible, with others in your area. You're most welcome to join JRMG on Facebook private group or Twitter as linked on the fact sheet. We have to challenge these unwarranted, unfair charges and ultimately get rid of them altogether. But while the social care review is delayed, yet again, we have to be heard loud and clear and as one. Thanks for listening.
Thanks very much, Marilyn, for a powerful and informative talk. I'll go through some of the questions whilst you're here as well, and we'll go to Helen after the break, I think. Sorry, Helen, for the quick switch around at short notice. Therese asks, how can the campaign find out more about how much local authorities receive from social care charging? And this is really important. And several years ago, In Control did a big freedom of information, finding that out from councils across the country. And that's something that we need to do again. And it looks like some of the people involved in this group are putting in freedom of information requests to find that out. It does vary from council to council. And this is what I meant about why there's no one size fits all, that you do have to do a bit of hard work and look at local council accounts, or ask the financial director or the cabinet member responsible for finances to ask them how much it is. So in some instances, it may be £20 million a year of an income stream. In other instances, it may be a lot less. And that will inform your individual tactics. And hopefully, as a group, we are an informal group of lots of different organisations, that we will be able to put together a bigger picture of social care charging in each borough. So from my experience, some local authorities that you challenge and say, why can't you scrap it and make the money somewhere else? They always have lots of reasons why they can't do that. So Marilyn, in Norfolk, have you had those experiences of trying to persuade them to find money from somewhere else?
Oh, yes. I mean, but with our particular people in charge, we just kept getting ridiculous figures about the amount that they were spending on adult social care. They just came back with, well, we need to spend money on other things all the time. But a lot of our figures we found out, as you say, from the budget accounts. But also, even if the council, the political party in charge isn't very helpful, often some of the opposition councillors will do this work for you too, who may be on your side. You know, whoever you can get from the council who is interested and capable with the financial side of things, which should be all of them, and willing to help. I'm sure you can get help that way too, or from the officers, as you said.
Yeah, it's strange because I sent that email.
No. There's someone with them.
She also emailed back, so I think she might have seen it.
I'm just gonna, okay, that's off. So I've been campaigning with many local councils asking those exact same questions. And what's really great about our seminar workshop today is that after the break, we have Tara and Kevin from Hammersmith and Fulham, who, a council that didn't chuck back these different excuses and actually scrapped social care charges. So Therese, to answer your question, in many boroughs, it can be a significant amount of money, but it does vary from up and down the country. But as we've seen in Hammersmith and Fulham, if there is a political will, that they can find ways of finding the money somewhere else rather than from charging disabled people. So I'm just having a brief, I'm not sure if this was you or someone else. Someone asks, what does BCP stand for? This may have been the speaker before you, Marilyn.
It wasn't me, I don't think. No.
So I'm not sure. Svetlana, why was ILF not ring fenced when local authorities took over from Department of Work and Pension? Would you like to come on and answer that?
I think I won't be able to answer question why, because that was the whole, well, I suppose that was the whole policy, not to because at that time, politicians who were in power and advisors who advised them thought that was a two-tier system. People who received money from ILF got a lot, and local authority people could get local authority funded social care didn't, and that was, well, yeah, that was political decision to do that. However, there was a grant that local authorities were given for the costs of supporting former ILF users, and some of them did choose to ring fence it. So, for example, again, Hammersmith and Fulham did, and other local authorities didn't, and that partially could be because of austerity, just because their funding was cut significantly over years, and they had to find all kinds of ways to close that gap in funding. And another way to look at it, obviously, it was a political choice that local authorities made. I do have to kind of say that we often hear that local authorities can, well, say to us that we have an huge increase in demand for social care, and our funding did not increase at all. So what do we do? And our response to this is, well, then you must join our campaign and campaign with us to change national government position. It's not right to just make decisions that they're making and hide behind the fact that they don't have money. There's still power. They have still power to make different kinds of decisions, or at least be loud about the fact that they do not agree with current situation.
Thank you, Svetlana. I also see in a number of questions asking specifically about social care charging. Unfortunately, in this webinar, we're not able to address them, but in the resources in the chat, Katie can post a link to a video that Svetlana, who just spoke, talked and gave a lot of information about how to challenge assessments. I forgot to mention, we also have Mitchell, who's with us today and has been a key part of the campaign. Probably need to add him to the coalition of group members, and he may be able to answer some of those questions as he's got technical expertise, but I don't want to make any promises. But what we will be doing in the coming months is having another webinar where it's specifically asking the questions that you're asking about circumstances you're facing, and we'll set up a panel of experts who can answer these questions. So, for example, I don't have the wealth of experience to give advice to people about the particular questions that people are asking. And it's very important that we give people the correct advice. To give people incorrect advice can make things worse. So yeah, do keep in touch. Look at our website, as we will hold more workshops looking to answer these particular questions.
Can I just say like one little thing? So generally, if you feel that something is not right, it's worth getting advice, and there are not that many lawyers who specialize in it. For example, in terms of taking back direct payments, we really would like to have a legal case challenging that practice. So if and that has to come through people taking initial legal advice, especially if you qualify for legal aid. We can also add resources. Usually if you're on means tested benefits and you don't have much in savings, you would be able to get legal aid. And secondly, all these questions about privacy and how much information local authorities ask for financial assessment, it's another very big question, which is really difficult to answer in a yes or no way. Local authority can ask for information because they need it to calculate how much a person should pay. So to look at person's finances, what kind of information they ask and whether it is excessive, it's a different question, which again should be explored and challenged legally. So that's why we are, and we know it's very difficult. We know it's time consuming and emotionally can be very difficult, but we are encouraging people to get legal advice on this. And you know, some of you might be willing to challenge this practice if you feel it's really unfair and you disagree and want to change it.
Thank you, Svetlana. We're going to take an access break now for 10 minutes. And afterwards, we're going to hear from Helen from Cheshire. And then Kevin and Tara from Hammersmith and Fulham will be joining us to talk about their 10 years of campaigning, which has resulted in the scrapping of care charges in Hammersmith and Fulham, and also exciting models of co-production working with disabled people being put in place at a strategic level. So if we take a break and come back at 3 minutes past 3. Thank you. So welcome back, everyone. Kevin and Tara have joined us from Hammersmith and Fulham, and they'll be talking shortly. But first of all, I'd like to introduce Helen to talk about the campaign in Cheshire and what's going on and what we can learn.
Thanks, John. I'll try and make this as quick as possible because I'm sure everyone's keen to hear from Tara and Kevin. Okay, so I am one of the co-founders of Cheshire Disabled People Against Cuts, and with Dorothy and Beverly, who are both on the call as well. And we are campaigning on social care charging on two fronts. We're campaigning against the unfairness of the current charging system, and we are campaigning ultimately for the abolition of care charging. So Cheshire Disabled People Against Cuts, DPAC, we're currently supporting 3 parents of adult disabled children who are all either currently or have been in receipt of charged for council care and support services. So that's across 3 different local authorities: Wirral, Cheshire West and Chester, and Cheshire East. I'm not sure if our friend from Cheshire East is with us, and if so, if she would like to talk at this point about the situation in Cheshire East. If not, I'll just very quickly mention what's happened there, which is that her amazing organising and campaigning and challenging has resulted in Cheshire East Council suspending its current care charging policy. And that is covered in this week's Private Eye, which is going to highlight the inherent unfairness of the regional variations in care charging across the different local authority areas in England, with the honourable exception of Hammersmith and Fulham, of course. And the position of Cheshire West and Chester Council is that their current charging policy, as they understand it, it's fully compliant with the legal framework. That's what they're telling us. And we know that Cheshire West and Chester Council received legal advice on that care charging policy following the Norfolk judicial review that Marilyn was talking about. Now, I've put in a Freedom of Information request asking them to disclose that legal advice. And we made a decision to do that primarily to make clear to the senior officers at the council and to the elected councillors that disabled people and their allies are organised. We're scrutinising their care policy. We're scrutinising the decision making that led up to the recent change in that policy and so on. That's primarily what we're doing. They may have a legal right to withhold that information because there is an exemption which covers professional advice. What we understand is that they are internally trying to weigh up the balance with their lawyers around that exemption and the public interest. So we'll see how far we get with it. There is very little coverage in Cheshire in the local media of the social care crisis, which is what it is. And there's very little coverage of the detail of the multi-million-pound cuts to both social care and disabled people's services that form part of the recent budget that was passed by that council back in March. So it's been down to Cheshire DPAC and our friends and allies in disabled people's-led organisations to put pressure on the local authorities on both those fronts. The local council leaders and the MPs are now very much aware that organised campaigning is taking place around social care and cuts to disabled people's services. They know that we are in contact with both local and national journalists. They know that there is growing media interest, and they know that our campaigning is backed up with detailed expert legal advice. That's worrying them, and it's leading to demonstrable responses. So, for example, Justin Madders, who's the Labour MP for the Ellesmere Port part of Cheshire, he asked a recent question in the House of Commons, and I imagine there will be more coming from him. So what we have also done is put out freedom of information requests to local authorities across England, asking them to release the data on their minimum income guarantee rates. Now, these are the amounts of money that central government sets as being the absolute minimum that a person who is being charged for care must be left to live on. Now, at the local level, the authority has the discretionary power to raise those minimum income guarantee rates at the local level. But as Marilyn found out, the central government does not collate that data, and we think that's probably perhaps deliberate, so that the level of awareness of the regional variations, the postcode lottery effect is low amongst the general public. We're anticipating that people are going to be very angry and very surprised when we get this data back and we collate it and we can point to those variations. I think it will be a very useful tool for strengthening our campaigning. Okay, so that's what we're doing on that. And what we would advise campaigners to do is to take advantage of your right to attend council meetings and meetings of your cabinet. You will have the right to ask questions and to read short statements out. The media is typically at those, it is going to be at those meetings, which are typically now streamed online. So that's one way of raising awareness of the care crisis and the charging scandal, which is what it is. And Since the 6th of May, local authorities have lost the legal right to meet remotely, unfortunately, but some of the committees are still meeting online in an informal capacity. On abolishing care charges, Cheshire DPAC's Gemma Corker is the chair and the disability officer of Tatton Labour Party. She wrote a motion calling for the end of social care charging and highlighted the gendered impact of the care crisis on women, which passed at that Labour Party CLP last month, and they sent it to Labour Women's Conference, which is happening later this month. If anyone from Disability Labour is here and would like to get in touch to work with us on getting a motion through to Labour's main conference via Disability Labour, would be very grateful for their help. Last night, the Reclaiming Our Futures Alliance trade unionist subcommittee met, and thanks to Mark Harrison of ROFA, I attended that, and we got the support of 4 members of the Trade Union Congress's Disabled Workers Committee for a proposal that a motion calling for the abolition of social care be worked up and put out to the unions to try and put pressure on the Labour Party to commit to the abolition of social care as a manifesto pledge prior to the next general election. That's about it in summary from Cheshire, I think.
Thanks very much, Helen. What's your view about Andy Burnham and the commitment to transforming social care?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was great and encouraging when Burnham came out in support of the abolition of social care charging. You know, he's quite strong on co-production. He has pretty good relationships with disabled people's led organisations in Greater Manchester. He did do something fairly trailblazing in co-producing a Greater Manchester Mayor's Disabled People's Panel. And I've been working with Rick Burgess to replicate a variation of that in Cheshire. We've now done that. So we now have a Cheshire Disabled People's Panel, and we will use that in the way that they did in Manchester to get Burnham on board with these kinds of fundamental issues affecting the rights of disabled people. We will be trying to replicate their success in our region.
Yeah, and just to explain to people, these are some of the models that we want to write up so that campaigners across the country can kind of understand like different tactics and approaches that can be taken. So outside Manchester, is there anything that campaigners and organisations can do to push Andy Burnham, maybe to make a national statement? Looks like he may have his eye on the leadership. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, he did. There's this amazing thing. I mean, about a week after he was elected, he went fully in, you know, with a statement in a Guardian interview or an Observer interview, and he laid into the Labour Party and said, you know, we need the kind of vision that set up the NHS in the post-war era. We need that degree of vision and foresight now. So, you know, it's pretty encouraging, the position that he took. But what we now need is that same level of commitment from the Labour leadership, and I'm hoping very much that our friends in the trade union movement will help us with that.
Thanks very much, Helen. So Tara, could you turn on your camera, please?
Hi.
Hi. Just very briefly, before I introduce Kevin and Tara, to say that after we've heard from what's the latest in Hammersmith and Fulham, we'll also be hearing from Sussex and West Sussex, and also from Camden. And then we'll also have time for questions and answers. And I'll explain to you at that point how you can access the microphone if you would prefer to talk rather than use the chat. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Tara and Kevin, a beacon of light, as Hammersmith and Fulham have scrapped social care charging, have made commitments to co-production and actually putting it in place. And we're really excited that you're here today because as we've seen from some of the questions and from some of the comments, a lot of people and campaigners are feeling very isolated, don't see much hope, don't really know what to do. So we really want to hear from you both about your years of campaigning and how you brought about radical change in Hammersmith and Fulham. So over to you, Kevin and Tara.
John, can you just confirm how much time we've got?
About 20 minutes,
Okay.
15 minutes.
Great. Hi everyone. So me and Tara are going to do a co-produced overview of, I guess, the campaign really from being activists in the borough, challenging around home care, and to now kind of working for the council and leading on initiatives around co-production and independent living. All of our work has come from the call for nothing about disabled people without disabled people, which we're all signed up to, and the UN Convention. And we do that in the recognition that disabled people are, without doubt, the furthest away from decision making. Most of our decisions are made by non-disabled people, and that just cannot be right. And that also is illustrated in the lack of understanding that social care is charging for social care is a barrier to independent living, and it is can't put it any more blandly than it's outright discrimination. All of our work has been developing through the social model of disability, and as we now work in the council, we are working towards a vision and an implementation of independent living that sees social care as just one pillar of independent living. And the campaign to end charging, I think, needs to really take on board that independent living is not just about social care, that we need to start linking up the pillars of independent living. So we're going to just talk about the history of disabled people's campaigning in the borough, and sadly we had to wind up our very effective campaign group in March called Hammersmith and Fulham Coalition Against Cuts. But the good news is that we achieved all three of our objectives, which was to end charging, which was to ring fence everybody's independent living fund support packages when the independent living fund closed in 2015, and that we campaigned to bring back the direct payment support service run and controlled by disabled people in the borough, which we lost in 2012. And so we've had that service, that support service back since 2020. So we achieved all three of our objectives. We're going to talk a little bit about the work of the Disabled People's Commission, what the Commission found out and suggested as a way forward, and why we focused on co-production, and why co-production has been such an important mechanism in our case as well to protect the non-charging policy. And then we're going to just reflect on some of the things, some of the suggestions, some of the ideas and the things that have happened that have led to getting rid of charging. Tara, I think I missed out a second. Can you move on to the third one? Tara, you're on mute.
Sorry, my dog was barking, so I put myself on mute. Sorry. Yeah, so Kevin has already mentioned HAFCAC, and sadly HAFCAC has closed. But HAFCAC was absolutely pivotal in getting us to where we are now in the borough. And I need to say, nothing is perfect here. There is still a lot of things that need to be tackled in Hammersmith and Fulham. So no, Kevin and I, and no one in this borough is saying that we've got everything that disabled people want, but we are moving in the right direction, and it feels like we are bucking the current trend, which at the moment feels everywhere to be going to hell. So what was important about HAFCAC is that it was run and controlled by disabled people, local disabled people. We were separate from the local DPO. We had no funding in the beginning, so we could say what we wanted and we could do what we wanted. Kevin's going to talk a bit more about the judicial review, but we focused on very specific things that Kevin has highlighted in terms of ending home care charging, mitigating the impact of the closure of the ILF, and also getting the direct payment support service back into the hands of local disabled people. And in addition to the achievements that Kevin has talked about, and the ones that you already know really, is that we are currently the only English local authority that doesn't charge people for community support, and it's been that way since April 2015. And that commitment at the moment is pretty rock solid at a time when local authorities are having to make swinging cuts in every direction. We also set up the Disabled People's Commission, which I'll quickly talk about in a sec. But overall and continuing, there is a very strong message in Hammersmith and Fulham that disabled residents can influence policy change. And that is absolutely at the heart of the council's commitment. There was already a strategic priority for doing things with residents rather than to residents. And what the Disabled People's Commission did was actually create the mechanism for turning the nice words into action. We also continue to have, the local disabled people continue to have a really strong relationship with the Labour leader, Steve Cowan, who, there is no doubt, he has been an extraordinary ally. He was kind of 15 years ago. He continues to be an incredibly strong ally. And I think many of the cabinet are too, but he, without a doubt, is the kind of the visionary behind it all. Kevin, back to you.
So, I mean, just to say to everyone, I mean, we started campaigning in 2006. So this has been a long journey. So again, as Tara said, we don't want anyone to think it's an easy, that kind of what's going on in Hammersmith and Fulham is easily won. It definitely isn't, and it's taking a long time. So using different mechanisms. So in 2008, we, with 3 disabled residents, took a judicial review against the previous administration that was elected, a Conservative administration that was elected in 2006, who had a manifesto commitment. It was in their manifesto not to reintroduce charging. And that was an absolute red rag rebel in terms of people had voted for them on the basis of their manifesto. We set up the independent group, and then we started working with the Public Law Project to take forward a judicial review. So it's always very good to be in contact with lawyers and trying to get strong links, and also through Inclusion London's Disabled People's Legal Network for connecting lawyers with campaign groups. We lost the first case, and we lost the second case. But what's important about that is losing was winning, because everything started with this judicial review case, the profile that was raised around the legal action, although we lost, that was nearly 2 years where the money stayed in the pockets of disabled residents because the council couldn't implement the new charging policy. So sometimes the mechanisms that we use for campaigning, they might not immediately get you what you want, and they might feel, I just remember it felt really disheartening, and that we felt really close to winning that judicial review. And we could have given up and stopped because it could have just floored us. But we regrouped and we continued to campaign. So, and as I say, the money stayed in our pockets where it should be in the first place. And that campaign raised our profile as disabled people, as a disabled people's organisation, and that attracted other campaigners and the opposition Labour Party at the time, who supported our campaign around charging. And so we started to build a stronger relationship between disabled residents and the Labour group, which was the future decision makers of our borough, and obviously now they're in control of the administration. And this relationship created the idea for a Disabled People's Commission.
So the commission, I know some of you have heard this before, but I think the commission is what has kind of kept the momentum going in terms of making sure the profile of disabled people and our issues are absolutely at the top of the political agenda. So the Disabled People's Commission was set up in September 2016. I chaired that commission, and Kevin was the policy officer for that commission. So activists, absolutely, in the leadership, 10 disabled people, and we were given a blank page in terms of what we wanted to focus on. And I think where the consensus was right from the beginning was that we probably all thought this was probably a once in a lifetime opportunity. So we needed to go for something big. No point wasting our time with tweaking around the edges, focusing on particular issues. We needed to go for something big and long lasting. So having done a bit of research, talked to loads of local people, it was clear that what we needed to do was to find the mechanism to get disabled people at the decision-making table. So we went for co-production because it's different from consultation, it's different from engagement and passive involvement. And it means that the ideas for change, the ideas for new services and policies come from disabled people. We work with decision makers and officers to implement those changes, and then we are part of the monitoring process to make sure that our decisions don't get diluted. So that's why we went for co-production. Now to oversee the implementation of the 8 recommendations, there is a co-production implementation group that is made up of 4 disabled residents, 4 councillors and 4 senior staff who are now meeting regularly. Again, it's not perfect because we're still having to work through what you all know is a bit of a power imbalance between residents and people with the power, councillors and senior managers. But we are definitely moving in the right direction. So for us, we try to create a definition that gets away from the academic stuff that there is on the internet about co-production. So we talk about it meaning disabled people, decision makers, all working together to plan, design and review policies and services that affect our lives, and crucially, thinking about the social model of disability that remove the barriers to our participation and inclusion. And we're 2 years into the job now, and things are moving slowly. They are. But what is really important is having Kevin and I sort of until the pandemic anyway, just being in the presence of our fellow officers, activists at heart, essentially disrupting the kind of age-old tradition of disempowering disabled people, but from within. And I think that has shifted things more quickly, but still not quickly enough. we haven't got time to go through the recommendations, but what I'll do in the chat after we've talked, I'll put in the link to the report, because it shows you that the recommendations set out the framework for change, taking account of where we are now to where we need to be to realise co-production for all disabled people in the borough. Oh, yeah, me, sorry. So I've already talked about us being disability rights activists. We've already talked about the disabled direct payment support service being back in the hands of disabled people. There is a big piece of work to co-produce the redevelopment of the Hammersmith and Fulham Town Hall. Disabled residents have been partners in that redevelopment since the beginning. That's really important. And it was difficult for council officers, for architects and for planners, because they wanted to work in the way that they've always worked. And there have been tears at meetings and there have been rows at meetings, but it's very clear now that everyone involved really sees the benefit of having disabled people at the heart of that decision making. And I'm sure we will continue to have bumps in the road, but there is no doubt that we will create something that will be, I think, a blueprint for every other development project that we have in the borough. And that's important. Kevin will talk a bit more about this. Almost a year and a half ago, the council agreed a vision for independent living that has been co-produced with disabled people, that is based on the social model of disability, 12 pillars of independent living, and Article 19 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But this is all part of a wider context for the council that has provided that almost all school children in the borough now have free school meals. We no longer have bailiffs, living wages for all staff, including contracted staff, end to 15-minute home visits. I guess things are changing radically, but I'm going to keep saying it because it's important, is that we are still learning along the way. It is not perfect. I don't know if we will ever reach perfect, but we continue to try. And I think the more that we can talk at these kind of events and share what we're doing, the more I suppose what we're doing will spread across other local authorities, because I know a lot of you are doing a huge amount of work to make that happen. Back to you, Kevin. Oh, no, I'm gonna cancel the next one because we haven't got enough time. You're on mute, Kevin.
I wanted to just say, in relation to COVID and the devastating impact on disabled people, that just during the pandemic, Hammersmith and Fulham Council has not had to focus on, all of our officers' time has been spent in supporting residents, and because we don't charge, there's no negative interactions about monitoring and financial assessments done in absentia. All of our officers have been able to focus their time on supporting residents and without charging, getting in the way of developing those important relationships at this particular time. So I just kind of round up I think everything we're talking about, and you have to pick your mechanisms that work locally. So everything we're talking about, we just used things as mechanisms and a way to raise the profile of alliances. And obviously, we did the legal campaign, but we did petitions, we did storming the council's annual AGM. We did fantastic posters that are still talked about across the borough 10 years later because they're very, very funny. So yeah, you just pick your mechanisms that kind of work where you are. Really important was having an independent campaign group that can be absolutely fearless in relation to those who have power over decision making. So HAFCAC was just not that we were not funded by anybody, or locally we had no relationship with the council. So yeah, so, and in fact, I mean, the litmus test of where we were and where we are now is that Tara was actually physically removed from a council meeting challenging the leader on charging, and she was physically removed by 2 security officers on the instruction of the leader, and now she's been the chair of the local Disabled People's Commission, and so the journey from there to where we are now is really, really huge. But I think that kind of really indicates how we were thought of as activists before. Obviously, building relationships with local politicians is really important. Lots of disabled people's organisations do not have any other than a transactional kind of third sector relationship with local politicians, and I think creating mechanisms and opportunities to develop those relationships is really, really important. I mean, at the end of the day, they're decision makers spending our money as residents and our resources, and they need to be more accountable. Making good connections with lawyers, and the territory has got more and more difficult with cuts of legal aid, and but we still need to do what we can. And I think really as well, sticking to our aims. So the message, even if it seems unlikely that you will achieve it, you just need to stick to it and not water it down. So we could have easily, in Hammersmith and Fulham, supported a kind of fairer charter type approach to policy, and we stuck with there is no such thing as fairer charging. It's outright discrimination, and we were told by previous leader of the council that you need to kind of wake up and smell the coffee, because you need to start living in the real world, because there will never be a time that there is no charging in Hammersmith and Fulham. Well, he's gone. He's no longer the leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council, and we're still here. So it's really important to stick to your guns and not. That's my view, and that's our view. And if you incidentally get kind of some changes that are not everything that you want along the way, that's a different issue. But actually, none of us have the right to support fairer charging, because there is no such thing as fairer charging.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin and Tara. I hope you can stay around till 4, because hopefully we'll have some time for some questions. Some great comments. Someone says, can we have a Tara and Kevin as disruptors in every county and borough around the country? That's a good idea. We'll have to work on that one. So Claire, can you turn on your camera so that you can give us an update from WinVisible?
Hi everyone, it's great to follow on from Tara and Kevin. It's been great to work with HUFCAC before they won, and we also remember Debbie Dom, who was a key member of the campaign, no longer with us. And also Kevin and I opposed charging in the Care Act on a coalition that we were in at the time. So we stuck to our guns then. So about WinVisible, for those who don't know, we're a grassroots multiracial group of women with visible and invisible disabilities across London and with the UK network. We're based at the Crossroads Women's Centre in London, and we work closely with the other groups there. Groups share our experiences to support each other against discrimination of different kinds and to strengthen each other fighting our cases. At the centre, disabled women are integrated with other women, and we share many concerns, whether as family carers, on top of coping with our own disability, which is work in itself, as women seeking asylum, or as survivors of violence. And we took part today in a Twitter storm with the Support Not Separation Coalition, which we're in, against forced adoptions. And one of the disabled mums who spoke at our workshop last month said that her daughter was taken because the daughter, being her future carer, was seen as child abuse. And that's what we want to change. On the charges, on the care charges, we did a placard saying care charges equals violence against women, because women are the majority reliant on social care. The charges are hitting us and making our lives a misery. The charges are causing us to drop out and live in squalid conditions, or have to rely for help on people around who often turn abusive, steal, or even rapist. Before the pandemic, 1.3 million pensioners and at least 500,000 disabled people under pension age were struggling with little or no support. The House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee called for an £8 billion injection into the social care budget for councils. That never materialised, but instead 37 billion is allocated to test and trace, which has been ineffective, and NHS contracts are handed out to the government's friends. Matt Hancock's sister was given an NHS contract and he owns shares in her company, which is called Topwood. As people have described, since the pandemic began, we've been fighting to live and against the government wiping out our Care Act rights and other rights, and Svetlana and John have been working very hard. We know about the call of older people in care homes, and just recently an article was published by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism that across England 25,000 people getting home care died in the past year, which is double the usual rate, and less than 10% of those were COVID related. We warned that was going to happen. We knew that women were cutting down on drinks, leading to kidney infection and pneumonia because no one was coming in to help people get to the toilet. People couldn't cook and eat the dried food that was delivered outside. We said to the council, only you know the disabled people who've dropped out due to charging. You need to contact them. Councils hold or can get the addresses of who is on disability benefits. And we got an official reply, refer people to the duty social worker. That is not what we were asking them to do. We've always opposed charges. Charges discriminate against severely disabled people who need more hours. Compared to unwaged disabled people are disproportionately squeezed from ESA as well as care benefits. Charges disproportionately affect people of colour, suffering systematic racism and health inequality, who are least able to afford private arrangements. Women have also experienced homophobia or racism in the needs assessment, like the woman who it was suggested she should bring a relative over from India to meet her support needs. Our campaigning against charging has included letters to the local paper are a good idea, the news coverage that people have been getting, on individual cases, raise them in the local press anonymously, write to the head of adult social care to intervene, or to MPs. Don't just go through the complaints procedure, which is long and exhausting. We've done open letters to the council and also in Greenwich. I hope Kate is on, and also Serena was at those demos. we've also aimed to bring groups together and get support from the community generally. We put our charging campaign together with users of day centres who were campaigning against closures, where Camden was saying day centres are backward, but only in order to sell off those sites to property developers. We stopped them charging £10 a day for transport to and from the day centres, and council drivers and escorts whose jobs were at stake joined our protests at the town hall. We highlight about care charges whenever it's a benefit policy discussion, which is often seen as separate. We have lobbied the all-party MPs select committees who have made criticisms which are not coming from the official opposition in Parliament. We also objected to charging and personal taxation proposals generally, such as a care tax from age 40, private insurance, and also the lifetime cap on care charges, which is a con, as they only count the spending, which is personal care, not the accommodation costs in residential homes like meals, laundry, cleaning, rent. That is not counted towards your lifetime cap limit. We also oppose the Women's Budget Group proposals for increased professionalisation, bureaucracy, and merging social care with the NHS in the name of freeing women from gender roles. Our daily living should not be medicalised, and we don't want more professionals who don't care about us in charge and taking away our power of decision. The Shadow Minister for Social Care, Liz Kendall, made a speech to the heads of adult social care following this bureaucratic model, which is using care services as expanding the economy and not caring about what relationships that creates. For example, she said, Labour understands social care is as much a part of our infrastructure as roads and railways. And she complained that family carers are having to give up work to do caring, and therefore the government loses their taxes. And that is not the approach we want to take. Lots of people don't want strangers coming into their homes, and all those official plans are just about making work more flexible so women can work harder and collapse. And guess what? You can get charged for your carer support after your carer assessment, and they just use the assessment to squeeze as many as they can out of you. And we don't have a lot of hope that if Keir Starmer has appointed Rachel Reeves as Shadow Chancellor, who said she would be tougher than the Tories on benefits, that money is going to come to communities to put an end to the misery that we're suffering, and the food banks and everything else. And we're part of the Global Women's Strike and Green New Deal for Europe campaign for a care income, which is kind of breaking out of the disability ghetto about care, and is about caring for people and the environment generally. And that if there is a care income, then women will be able to opt out, opt in, go part-time or whatever, and that would fit alongside the National Independent Living Support Service and the principles of the UN Convention, which is for independent living. And you know, the unwaged family carers save the government 132 billion a year. Okay, I think I'll stop there because I know people want to discuss as well.
Yeah, thanks very much, Claire. Hopefully that's again very informative, very inspirational. What you're doing at WinVisible, and a lot of the campaigning tactics that you talked about very, very useful. So I'd just like to go on to our final speakers from Sussex and West Sussex. So Lulu, would you like to start off?
Hi, so I'm Lulu Wheely-son from West Sussex, and I set up a group probably about a month ago called Warrior Carers West Sussex, basically to support carers as much as is possible, and really to bring people together. I mean, I've got a very good friend who's on this call whose son is my son's best friend. And we were talking about how, although we had support from each other because we only live around the corner and we could talk, that other carers probably didn't have that support network. So I set up the group, and we sent out flyers to sort of various centres, and they've very kindly sent them on to others, and I've had people joining. So we're in very early stages. Initially, I sent out a questionnaire about the care charging and what processes they'd undergone. And I'll just find the pieces. But what was happened is basically that the council, regarding the care charges to carers, their process has been very flaky. It's very non-consistent. They don't seem to even have a policy, and they have. There's a huge variation in what people are being charged. I mean, I've heard about one person being charged £38 a week, and another one being charged up to £130 a week. And I've had the people are just desperate because they simply cannot afford it. There have been people who have threatened who've said, look, I'm going to have to take them out of their day centres. So basically they'll just be stuck at home all day with generally it's a parent carer, but so it's very difficult. We've seen how bad it is since being in lockdown, how difficult it is. I mean, my own house, my son has been tearing it to pieces methodically. I've had doors ripped off, doors smashed in. It's been very difficult. And this is what happens when, a lot of the time our children have to be stuck at home. They become extremely frustrated. So there's a few things that I've sort of discovered from doing the questionnaires, from talking to other people. There's a huge variation charged. Social services say this charge is calculated from the benefits people receive. It's no relation to the size of a care package. So if you have 1 day a week, 5 days a week, your charge is the same. So we're sort of saying don't reduce your care package because it won't make any difference. They can't threaten to withdraw any support if it's on their care plan. If the support is set up, they can't threaten to withdraw it. And there are people who are already going into arrears because they are being charged backdated payments. So in my own case, I was paying £5 a week. I received a letter on the 24th of January saying we will be undertaking an assessment. So I assumed that meant they would be contacting me to go through an assessment. And the next thing I knew, 6 weeks later, I received a phone call from a social worker saying your charge is now £78 a week. So, and we're backdating it to the 24th of January. And they are now taking it out of my son's direct payments. So in effect, they've reduced his care package. People who don't have direct payments are expected to set up direct debits. Some people have refused to pay it. And we don't really know how that's going to affect them. One person has been threatened with having their care taken away, their day centres taken away from their charges from their young people. and others have been told, if you can't afford it, just take them out of the day centre. So there's no compassion from social services. My own dealings with them, they have been absolutely appalling. I've said to everybody I sent out a template that I sort of wrote and said, fill in your details and send it to the council. I've said to copy in adult social care, adult social services, gave the addresses, but I said also to address it to the complaints department and also copy in the chief executive, because they need to realise the impact of what's going on. I sent a letter complaining. They sent me pages of waffle that said absolutely nothing. They sent back to me. So I went through the whole thing and picked each item out. I mentioned the Norfolk judgment, and they said to me that the Norfolk judgment didn't apply to them, but didn't go into any detail why it didn't apply to them. So, I mean, the story is pretty bad, because basically they are just taking anything above the minimum income guarantee they're taking. I have done freedom of information requests. I did a freedom of information request about the minimum income guarantee, and they've come back saying what it is, which is the only way I could get that information, because I couldn't get it from them before just by asking them. And I've also done freedom of information requests about how where does the money go that we are supposed to be paying? Does it go directly into paying for our children's care or our young people's care, or does it go into the pot? In which case, it's not really a care charge, because it's just paying the council's deficit. I've also done a freedom of information request asking what was the other thing I asked? Sorry, my mind's gone blank.
Lulu, I'm mindful of the time. As
Sorry.
we're up to 4 o'clock. I was wondering if Sue has anything to add or you would like to say.
No, it's just really that we're sort of getting information at the moment. We've not really been able to do anything apart from hassle the council left, right and centre. But I think that really what we need to have is a bigger campaign nationally to scrap these charges altogether. That's me.
Thanks very much. Sue, you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll be really quick. So my name's Sue Livette, and I'm a support provider in West Sussex. So we've been working with lots of families really on a very individual level to help them to understand the process, to look at disability related expenditure, the murky world of household expenses, and to get people to complain, request information and do all of that good stuff. And also support families who are bringing some legal action. So we can't go into any detail at the moment. I understand there has been a response to the letter before action that was sent a couple of weeks ago by Mitchell, but I'm trying to use the access that I have to the Director of Adult Social Services and to my fellow chief executives across West Sussex to really kind of push for change, to raise awareness and deal with these care charges, because they're a terrible, terrible thing.
Thanks very much. So we're coming up to 4 o'clock. So unfortunately, I've been looking at plenty of wonderful questions. So I think what the different groups need to think about is maybe we need to run another webinar in the next month or so, rather than with speakers, that we have a panel answering and addressing lots of these great questions. I think on the on the national campaign, you're absolutely right that that's one angle that Inclusion London's very keen on. I don't know, Svetlana, if you got some final comments on the national campaign and why that may be the route, one of the routes we need to look at.
Well, I think I can just repeat what we said. We do believe that now is the window of opportunity potentially, although we should be mindful that we have a government that might not agree with our vision, but it is a window of opportunity, and we will do our best to push them as much as we can, and we will need all possible help from everyone involved today and beyond.
Yeah, so just finally, before we wrap up, I'd like to thank all the organisations, individuals who helped put on this event. It's all been done on, a lot of people putting in their own time on a volunteer basis. It is a group of organisations and individuals. So I see that Mitchell was here on the chat writing in some support, and he's another key ally, a lawyer. And what we will do is look at the more general questions that we can respond to, and the email that we all send out to you to give more resources, template letters, etc. We can't answer the more individual questions, but in some of our resources, we have one webinars addressing plenty of those questions. And we'll also include some template letters that have proved very successful. And also, hopefully, Inclusion London in the next few months can also run a panel of specialists who can address these questions directly from participants. So finally, I'd just like to thank Kat and Francis, and also Louise for providing the captioning. So goodbye and thank you.
Thank you.